are countries dealing with the US tariffs and challenges to global trade? We hear from the Pakistani and Malaysian finance ministers. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. This year's IMF and World Bank spring meetings happen amid the tariff turmoil and the impact it will have on the global economy. How are nations which export to the United States, like Malaysia, being affected? We will discuss that later in the show with the country's finance minister second. But first, Pakistan. The International Monetary Fund lowered Pakistan's GDP growth forecast to 2.6% this year. I sat down with the Pakistani finance minister and started the interview by asking about the effect of the tariffs.
From our perspective, I believe it's less about tariffs, because if I look at the weighted average tariff of imports, US imports into Pakistan, it's a little over 7%. Exports from Pakistan into the US is a little over 10%. So I don't think that's an issue, but as you've looked at the formula, it's really the imbalance on the trade side. So we export a little over $5 billion, we import close to about $2 billion, so the gap is sort of $3.5 billion or in that range. Now, we can do more in terms of what we're already doing. So we do procure high quality cotton from the US, because that goes into our garments and into value addition in terms of sort of bed linens and all of that, the value added exports on the textile side. Soybeans, another one. Then we looked at other asset classes. So to close that gap quite significantly, I don't think is that big an issue. Our Prime Minister has already mentioned that we will constructively engage with the US and will send a high-level delegation. But let's also put it in a little bit of context. The top 10 countries account for about roughly 80% of the deficit, the US deficit. Pakistan is 33rd in that totem pole. So from our side, I think the engagement with the US is quite frankly beyond the immediate trade and commerce tariffs. So a case in point, for example, would be the US delegation, which was in Islamabad a couple of weeks back around the Minerals and Mining Conference. And that, obviously there were people from all over the world, especially around copper, because the first project was declared, which is Ricodec, and the financial close has already taken place. That was also announced. But copper, as you know, is going to be a key and critical element of the energy transition. We also know is going to go into global shortage. The Tatian belt in Pakistan is the supply side answer to that shortage. And we find significant interest from the US in investing and getting into that minerals and mining discussion with Pakistan. And therefore, it's a wider canvas that we want to engage the US administration as we go forward.
But in terms of your broad exports, you want a stable market. Would you be looking at other markets to get that kind of stability?
I think that's a very interesting question that, given what's going on, maybe the global trade might take a little bit of backseat for the time being. But that is also an opportunity for everyone to look at regional corridors and regional connectivity. So from Pakistan's perspective, we are already doing quite a bit, obviously, with China, with GCC, Central Asian republics, where we now have a lot of focus, and Africa. These are all examples of new markets where we do find that we can diversify and go into these regional corridors as we move forward. And that can be really a real engine of growth for a lot of countries, including Pakistan.
Now, looking at your relationship with the IMF, you have emphasized the need for fundamental economic reforms to lessen dependence on the IMF. I mean, could you elaborate on that? What kind of reforms are you considering to become more self-reliant?
You know, the macroeconomic stability across all indices, stable currency, FX reserves, inflation is a fantastic story. Our twin deficits have now turned into surpluses. We're probably going to have the first time after a very, very long time a current account surplus for this fiscal year. Our primary account is in surplus on the fiscal side. Policy rate is down by 1,000 basis points. So on the back of that, we actually got a rating upgrade last week from Fitch. Now, the structural reforms which are now in execution on the taxation side, you know, we have been languishing as a country between 9 to 10% in terms of tax to GDP. This year, at the end of June, we will get to 10.6%, which is 1.8% improvement year on year.
Yeah.
What we have agreed with the fund is to move towards 13.5% during this duration of the 37-month program. And that, quite frankly, would allow us to bring fiscal sustainability and also join Committee of Nations around that. The second is reforms around energy and what we're doing on the power side, on the transmission side, in terms of our discos which are being privatized, private boards being appointed, bringing the tariff structures down, and then the whole reform around state-owned enterprises and the privatization agenda. Now, that's one thing which we haven't done well in the last year, which is privatization. We have a new chairman of the Privatization Commission, so we are going to bring our national airline. We hope to get 3 FIs going through the finishing line this year in terms of privatization. 3 discos are on the privatization program. So we are going to really speed up that process as well. And then ultimately, you know, you can't just look at the revenue imperative, it's also the public finance. So we are going to right-size the federal government, basic reforms on the pension side, and also very active debt management that we are doing at this point in time to reduce the single biggest line item for us, which is debt servicing.
Just getting back to the tax issue for a moment, tax receipts that is. Pakistan is a very large informal economy, and you've proposed some solutions, digital solutions. Could you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah. So you're right in terms of your observation. You know, cash in circulation in Pakistan is a little over 9 trillion rupees, and you put it in the context of the revenue receipts we are going to get this year, which is about 12.3 trillion. So we increased our tax revenues by 29% in the last fiscal year, and this year will be anywhere between 28 to 30% to get to 12.3. And then you see it in the context of cash in circulation, which is really the informal economy. So we have to move that towards the formal economy. Now, what is sort of fueling that cash in circulation? All sectors which have not been part of contributing towards the exchequer in the same way that they contribute to the GDP. Real estate, agriculture, retail and wholesale. So the first time in the history of Pakistan, agriculture income tax has been legislated through the provincial assemblies over the last fiscal year. Now, coming back to your point around technology and the role of technology, I think that is already playing in giving us huge dividends even in this fiscal year. This end-to-end digitalization, and we are using it in the form of AI-assisted audits. We are doing digital enforcement, whether it's on the customs side, whether it's our track and trace systems, where we are digitally monitoring the entire supply chain in the largest sectors, in cement, in sugar, in fertilizer, in tobacco. And we have stopped a lot of tax evasion, and sales tax have gone up in a very big way. So it's already paying the dividends, but we are going to continue on this journey because it's really technology and end-to-end digitalization which is going to help us with the leakage and therefore the enforcement and compliance function.
And in terms of your economic challenges, I mean, just a few minutes ago you mentioned inflation, for instance. I mean, that's a big success story for Pakistan, isn't it? At one time, inflation was running at what, about 38%?
Yeah. So in March, we clocked 0.7. So this is, and it's, the core inflation is down. The average inflation for the year is about 5 to 6%. And on the back of that, food inflation is down, and that has helped us in a very big way in terms of the revival, because when you bring this down, as I said, 1,000 basis point reduction in the policy rates, so the financing rates have come down. In turn, they are helping us with both on the consumption side of things and on the industry side of things in terms of more competitive financing costs, more competitive energy costs. Clearly, the import bill and the oil prices are helping us at this point in time as well, because that, quite frankly, is part of the imported inflation. And that, so what we, where do we go from here, I think is a very, very important point, because we don't want to squander this opportunity. And this time around, we just want to make sure that we go towards inclusive and sustainable growth for the country.
So I want to talk about your relationship with China. China has been deeply involved in Pakistan in infrastructure development through CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. What are the sort of measurable impacts that you see from CPEC on China?
Yeah, as I think I've said previously as well, there was phase one and now we are in phase two. Phase one was all about infrastructure, right, which was the power infrastructure, the road infrastructure, the port infrastructure. And phase two is all about monetization of that infrastructure. And that's where the first phase was largely G to G, right? So a lot of state-owned enterprises, a lot of financings from the state-owned banks, etc. The second phase is really B2B, where we see a lot of, China has obviously moved up the value chain in a very big way, right, in terms of value addition on the technology side, on the electronic side. So we are hoping that Pakistan can be a good destination for some of the industries which can be held by low wages in Pakistan through our special economic zones, and we can sort of take that forward. And there are some very good examples of that where this is already beginning to happen. So for example, there's a company called Service Long March. So they, Long March is a truck tire manufacturing company. They've gone into a joint venture with a large conglomerate in Pakistan, and 80% of their truck tires are now being exported. Another example, very quick example of that would be BYD. BYD has now come in with, again, a very large conglomerate. They've joined the joint venture. They've launched the joint venture. They are importing the CBUs at this point in time. We're hoping at some point in time they will start the assembly and start exporting from Pakistan as well.
One other point is, what is your broad assessment of the relationship between Pakistan and China right now? I mean, beyond just the economic relationship, the political relationship, how has it evolved?
I was there very recently, as I mentioned, for the Boao Forum, which is the first time in my current capacity that I was there. And, both the content, the quality of participants, just absolutely amazing. And, but I've been also on the visits along with the Prime Minister last year, where we were, hosted by President Xi and Premier Li. More recently this year, as you know, President Asif Zardari went with a delegation, and he was again hosted by President Xi. So I think these are ironclad relationships, long-standing relationships, and it, as I said, goes across asset classes, across businesses. Very, very strong relationship.
Minister, thanks so much.
Real pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Now let's turn to Malaysia. It's a small country, but ranks 17 on the list of largest exporters to the United States. I interviewed the country's finance minister second, and the first question had to be about the tariffs.
I think it's important to note that tariffs have been applied on a global scale, right? I think the whole world is digesting how to address these issues. Malaysia is no different. We are an open trading nation, and we've always depended on a very good system of multilateralism, rule-based mechanisms. So we are concerned. However, what we need to focus on is what do we do about this? Yeah. So Malaysia's approach is in twofold. One, we want to continue engagement. Engagement, to reiterate back, multilateralism and rule-based principles are important. Discussions ongoing with our US counterparts to see where we can address gaps and so on, and where it is commonly beneficial, we can look at how we address those areas. But second is actually looking at how do we create resilience in the economy. And in this instance, I think Malaysia is a little bit better suited and balanced than others, because over the years, we've been focusing about diversification of the economy. Diversification in industry, diversification in markets, and so on, so we're not overly dependent on any single market. Yes, while as you see the IMF latest estimate for global trade has been adjusted downwards, GDP has been adjusted downwards, so everybody will move downwards in line with that. But it's important to note that even for Malaysia, we're still on positive growth trajectory. Well, we are targeted, according to IMF, at 4.1% growth. That's still reasonable. And what we'll do is continue to work on plans that we actually have to diversify still the economy, to deepen the economy, and to continue to have domestic direct investments that will cushion blows.
Right. When you talk about resilience, I was looking at a post that you made on social media. You said brace for impact, but don't be overly worried. You also wrote that Malaysia, as you just pointed out, is better placed than most due to our diversified economy and export markets, as well as our competitive advantage in certain sectors such as manufacturing. It's a very reassuring statement. Now, in terms of the steps that you will be taking immediately, would you be seeking some kind of exemption on certain products coming to the United States?
I think it's important that let's understand that headlines always look very dramatic. And understanding the industries that you're in facilitates a better conversation along that. And hopefully that will lead to, as you suggest, some sort of exemption that actually come in. And in this instance, I think the semiconductor supply chain globally is quite narrow. Malaysia plays a very important role in the semiconductor space. And I think there will be ways that we can manage to figure out how to navigate this space. The reality is, as global growth comes down, we cannot say that there will be no impact. There will be. But the key thing is to make sure that you have a better chance to turn out better than others along this way. And I think the resiliency of what we structured the economy, the ability to take shocks, the fiscal space creation that we've been doing and during our economic transformation gives us better levers to be able to pull.
Right, you talk about the technology sector. What about things like agriculture?
Agriculture, I think, is a globally traded good. Malaysia has not reached self-sufficiency in agriculture, but we are giving priority in terms of some selected areas. Say, for example, rice production. Rice production is very fundamental because it's a staple food in the country. So what we're trying to do is actually to induce larger fields along the way. We're trying to get better crop management along the way, and the government is providing support to actually allow that to actually occur. Providing growth in infrastructure in order to make sure there's enough water to address the needs of the farmers and so on will facilitate better, more stable supply in the long term. So I think that's what's important, right? If you have the means and if you have fiscal space, you can do things that are no regret moves. So improving infrastructure is a no regret move.
Right. We're looking at some of the short-term solutions that you've been outlining there, but looking longer term, I mean, would it be of a greater advantage to Malaysia to transition its economy to something like high-tech services, that which would drive the economy?
I think when the current government came into power about 2.5 years ago, it took a step back and I said, look, we need to relook again at the economy and say, what are the key areas that we really want to do? So high grading the economy was an important element. In our new national industry master plan, we're laying out sectors that we believe are important for Malaysia to embrace. Of course, we want to start with areas that we have competitive advantages. So we start with E&E, we start with semiconductors, we go to adjacencies like data centers, AI, and so on. But we also look at things that are naturally being driven by trends that are important. Say, for example, energy transition is an important element. So how do we shore up that transition along the way and make that build up? At the same time, we recognize that if you look at the ASEAN region, this year Malaysia chairs ASEAN, one of our big initiatives among ASEAN is to get the ASEAN economic bloc to work much stronger together. Inter-ASEAN trade is only at about 22% of the whole base. Our GDP is 3.98 trillion. We have nearly 700 million people living in this base. So surely, if we are able to cooperate and work in a better form, we can create better opportunities along the way. So a lot of initiatives that are being done among ASEAN countries is to facilitate that in terms of trade agreements, in terms of instant payment mechanisms and so on, to facilitate that trade, create resilience. The second thing that Malaysia is doing is actually understanding that if you look at ASEAN, ASEAN has a wide range of levels of economic growth, from the most advanced economies to some basic economies. However, what we can do is look at how we try not to compete as much with each other and complement each other. So for example, between Malaysia and Singapore, we established this Johor Special Economic Zone. The two countries have decided to get together to facilitate the ability of the zone to support each other. Ease of movement of goods, ease of movement of people will attract certain things. Creating more incentives to attract the right type of industries into the area provides a catalyst to that growth. So I think you will see within the ASEAN region more inter-regional cooperation in order to grow inter-ASEAN trade, but also positioning that each are helping each other to make it better. So better, prosper thy neighbor sort of philosophy.
In terms of how you respond to the tariffs, would there possibly be a better outcome if ASEAN negotiates as a bloc rather than individual countries negotiating bilateral deals?
I think the reality is the US is receiving bilateral discussions. So that's reality. However, within ASEAN, we have all embraced a common philosophy. We go principle-led mechanism, right? In a principle-led mechanism, we do three things that are important. Firstly, embracing multilateralism, embracing rule-based mechanisms. So in all the conversations, what we want, we all reiterate the same thing. That this is important. If you want a stable, sustainable environment, you've got to go back to these sort of principles. Second, do things that you can control, and work together in that manner so that you remove or you reduce dependencies as far as you can. Create more inter-regional connections. So that makes the ASEAN bloc even stronger, working together. And I think third, if you look at the whole ASEAN arrangement, the partnership within ASEAN partners are strong. So every time everybody has a conversation and stuff like that, there's a lot of sharing that goes on. So we try to build on each other. We have to recognize that every nation state is a sovereign state. Every development has got slightly different elements compared to somebody else. So they must have the freedom to address their own particular elements, but find the common harmonizing element and then work towards that to actually guide how ASEAN positions.
Would Malaysia be looking at diversifying its market in the future to ensure that there is stability?
I think all countries are looking at diversifying markets, right? So again, as I said, one of the reasons why Malaysia is a bit more confident in going through this crisis is the fact that our markets are already diversified. But we will continue to push. Intra-ASEAN trade is one area, opening up better conversations with China, better conversations with EU, better conversations with Latin America and Africa can only help trade be a lot stronger between each regions. So pushing new FTAs element, riding on the current trade agreements that already exist, CCTV, for example, RCEP, for example, in order to make trade work and move in a better form, is a response in order to de-risk a little bit some amount of that. But the reality is we have to understand, whenever the tide is coming up, all ships will go down. Whenever the tide is going up, all ships will go up. We just want to make sure that you are in the middle of the ocean and not by the beach.
You mentioned China. China's been very steadfast, some may say very tough in its response to these tariffs imposed by the United States. In fact, it's gone almost toe-to-toe with the United States. The other thing about China is that it's been a champion over the last few decades of globalization, of multilateralism. What kind of stability does that bring to the region?
I think every country in the world, we're looking at how do we continue trajectory forward. Countries that promote multilateralism, rule-based mechanisms, I think ASEAN will be very appreciative and want to continue to push along the way. But each sovereign state must take its decision, what is good for it, its own balance. So we'll find that alignment. So we're hopeful that continued push to work as a bloc, continued work in order to connect multiple blocks will create a bit more stable ground and maybe newer markets in order to stabilize things along the way. It's not going to be smooth sailing, but there is a path that can allow you to have stability as you move along.
President Xi was recently in Malaysia as part of his three-nation visit. How would you assess the visit and the relationship with China?
I think the China relationship with Malaysia has gone back quite a long time. Yeah, it's more than 50 years since our first trade deals that have been working along the way. And over the years, I think we've all built a greater understanding of each other. But at the same time, Malaysia is an open trading nation. We appreciate our trades with the US, we appreciate our trades with the EU, and actually that trade is actually quite balanced. So if you look at President Xi's visit, I think it reaffirms alignment of wanting to work on where there are common interests. I think there are MOUs that were entered into that offers newer opportunities that we can both jointly explore. And there are commitments to actually simplify things along the way. So for example, if I take an important supporter to the economy at the moment is tourism. Malaysia is grateful that actually we're now promoting where we have longer term visas between China and Malaysia. So people can easily transit each other way, and that helps our domestic economy and refreshes. Now I think this year total tourism receipts are already higher than what we were pre-pandemic, and total visitations will also be wider than what we were before pandemic. So I think again what we want is clarity, what we want is joint cooperations, what we want is the ability to work cross borders, multilateral, rule-based mechanisms. And anybody who offers along that line, we should embrace because the world has always progressed well against that frame.
Minister, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we need to leave it there. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.